All right, and we are live. Okay, hello, and welcome to another TSN Armada live broadcast. This is, I think, the fourth or fifth one that we've done now.
Something like that, yeah.
All right. So over the next hour, we're going to be chatting about game mastering. We're going to talk about how we go about about planning, running a mission for multiple crews, using the GM controls in the TSN sandbox, and as we're talking, anything else that comes up or any questions that are asked in the live chat, we'll be answering as well as we go through. At the moment, you can see in the background just some footage from one of the games that we had a while ago in the TSN that I recorded. I've just got that playing. We've got Fish, one of our game masters, is currently getting set up with an actual mission script, isn't he? So that he can game master, and we can have that playing in the background. You can see somebody actually game mastering as we talk. Let's have a look. So where is it up to? We do have a script written for this, and it's got to keep following it because I've got used to now with that commentary of not following a script and just going for it. Joining me for this chat, I have Matthew Vaj. He's one of our game masters. Raiden, who's part of the game mastering team as well, and Zanster. Each of them has extensive experience of game mastering for the TSNRP community. A couple of them have been doing it for a couple of years now, I think. Is that right, you guys?
Yeah,
extensive.
absolutely.
Yeah, extensive. Yeah, that's how you describe it.
Okay, the thing that they're not used to though is the live broadcast and talking over each other. So we'll have to work on that. So when we meet up on a weekend on a Saturday, these three key players in making sure that we've got missions to run, that the stories are coming through, and that we have something interesting to engage players. They're used to GMing for 4, 5, or even 6 crews at a time. So we get loads of people online, which is really quite an experience sometimes, isn't it? Especially from a game master point of view.
Yes, definitely.
All right, so it looks like Fish is still setting up. We've got a link to Fish. He's sharing his screen with us that we'll be transferring over to shortly. He's just getting everything set up there. He's going to be running, like I say, a game master's script, and as we're watching, we'll be able to comment on some of the things that he's doing. But we've got a few different discussion points to go over. Shall we move on to the first discussion point, gentlemen?
Sure.
All right. So somebody's just asking about whether this is going to be recorded. From what I've seen on YouTube, this is being saved every time I live stream. Hopefully it's being saved because I'd like to watch back over these. I know a couple of people have been saying that they've managed to watch back over them as well, so they should all be there, and I'll try and list them on our channel. Anyway,
the game is starting that Fish is running.
Excellent. Right, okay, let's switch back to that. Fantastic. So I'm going to try and transfer over to my game broadcast. We set this up in the last few minutes, so hopefully everything will run smoothly. Let's swap over here. There we go. It looks like it is working, guys.
And there was much rejoicing.
I'm just going to reposition some of my windows. I've got quite a few windows open at the moment. Okay. On the live chat, just tell me if the volumes aren't great, or if you can't hear Vaj, Zanster, or Raiden at any point, and I'll try and crank up their volume a little bit so you can, if one of them is particularly quiet, for example. So, first discussion point, we're going to talk about actually crafting a campaign, because when it comes to game mastering a mission, there's a lot of effort, I think, on our side that goes into it. There's a lot of coming up with the overall concept of the story. So Zanster, you've spent a lot of time recently crafting the Atlantis campaign, haven't you, which is a series of GM missions. Do you want to go back into a little bit of how you've gone about organizing that and coming up with the stories that go into it?
Yeah, so you and I and Vaj got together and said, hey, let's try and do this Armada online thing, and we should do a campaign while we do this bunch of games. And we talked through several ideas, and I wrote up an outline of those, talk about what we would do at each session, and sort of the overall idea was that the hegemony has taken over uh, USFP, and so how would the TSN take it back? And we essentially planned the campaign around that. And so we've already had the first session. They've started going back through the systems, and so I wonder if you come up with a plan along that line. You kind of have to think of the practicals, where point A to point B, what you might put as barriers along the way or challenges or those kinds of things, and something that's going to be interesting as well. And you don't necessarily want to blow up your players right away,
which sometimes happens.
That did happen in the campaign today earlier. So
Yeah.
2 out of the 3 ships were destroyed, but they came back.
Yeah, I think something when we've been putting together these bigger campaigns, we've had to think a lot about, all right, this is a story that we want to tell, and you want like some kind of like intrigue going on, some politics going on in the background and things, but those don't necessarily translate into a mission. So as part of that campaign, you look at your overall story that you want to communicate to your players, and then say, right, where would a mission slot in really well here? Where could we use like a proper action to engage enemy forces? Because that's where a lot of it comes about, isn't it?
Right. The Artemis engine itself lends itself to missions of a combat nature. Sometimes makes it difficult to provide exposition for your broader story arc. So you have to work those things in either at the beginning, or it's better immersion if you can put those story points in the middle of the mission, so that those who are paying attention can get that story as they play through the game.
Yeah, and like I know we've done things where we've tried translating it into a mission, and it's not always worked. Particularly things like an escort mission. We need to move this high value target from point A to point B, and we've found that there's you can get caught up with the moving from point A to point B, and in actual fact, you build your missions around that story. So that's the story element we want. How are we gonna shift the mission so it's actually focused on the action of the ambush that happens by enemy forces, rather than I've lost my train of thought. So you rather than all the transit, because we've done missions before where you'll transit 4, 5, 6 different sectors, and it can be a real drag for some people. Like weapons officers have nothing to do. Helm literally points the ship and goes to warp. Comms nothing to do, and trying to get quicker into the action where your players are engaged and having to do things needs to be really thought about in that planning phase.
On that note, from my point of view, as a GM and in the planning phase, I think also it's important. Sometimes you want to surprise the parties, having the same missions over and over, the same type of escort, same type of guard this base or attack that base. It's gonna wear players down, in the long term. So me, especially in these sessions, I always try to, put in at least a little bit of a surprise, or try to make the sector at least a little bit living, in terms of, spawning some escaping ships from the bases, or adding some interaction between the NPCs.
Mm-hmm.
It's sometimes really difficult, but I think it adds to the flavor of those missions to make every mission looking at least a little bit unique.
All right. And just a point about the little bit of surprise there. Raiden likes to surprise me as well, like the day before the mission, going, oh, by the way, I need all this extra coding adding to the sandbox for mine. Do you think, Raiden, that comes up sometimes, doesn't it?
It's been 2 days before that.
Yeah. So, Raiden came up with a couple of missions for this campaign as well, didn't you, Raiden?
Well, I do have one, indeed.
Yeah, and
I will even run it. So I'm already praying because I choose a very interesting concept with a little bit of a surprise. This is my trademark, and I'm quite worried if I will be able to actually execute it in the way I intend to. So let's see.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna tweak the audio slightly. Apparently yours is a little bit quieter, so I've turned you guys up on TeamSpeak. Hopefully it's balancing a little bit better. Keep the feedback coming through the live chat first. So yeah, I think Raiden, you've been responsible for putting together a lot of the races, but that's off topic. Let's have a look. So something that we have to think about with planning as well is how we communicate that story to players. Sometimes we've used Fleet News broadcasts, haven't we, quite a few times? I don't know, have any of you guys been involved in that?
Yes, I've done a couple of those or participated in those.
So Fleet News broadcasts is there's a group of players in the TSN that will get together and they will record segments of voices and things, and like almost like the news broadcast that you would play through, I don't know, through your TV that you could catch up on, and it gives an insight for players into the background. They also record different audio clips and things that we can use. So sometimes if there's some update that we want broadcast the whole thing, or we want to get the idea of what might be going on in another area of space that we then end up responding to, they come through those broadcasts. So it's not necessarily having to play through it, but you can link in other bits, like the 3rd Division has engaged the Krellians in this area, and they suffered a huge defeat, and now there's lots of them lost. And then our mission will be go into enemy territory and see if we can retrieve some of the life pods. So we get the background story in through those kind of methods, don't we?
Yeah, that's probably one of our most powerful ways of getting story across without boring players actually in missions.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely essential if you want to have like a top-notch campaign and stuff. Sadly, it's too expensive on the time of people involved to produce these things. So even as TSN, we are not able to produce it always. And I definitely think it's one of the things that adds the greatest immersion ever possible to these games. And people will get engaged and caught into the story. And the goal of the game is, to have a good time and play around.
And I think coming back to the point you made, Raiden, if we use the same thing over and over and over again, people get bored of it. So the fact that it takes so much time and effort, it makes it a little bit more special, and it doesn't make it so frequent that we're like, oh no, not another one of those that we're gonna have to sit through. It keeps mixing it up. Some bits will come through the opening briefing, some bits will come through the actual mission briefing that we're going to go on. So I mean that's a lot of crafting a campaign. So if you get a chance to have the same group come in over and over again, say, I know somebody was talking about they hosting a library, and they were saying how they had lots of people joining. I think they managed to get like 20 people joining them. Being able to move the story on with like, oh, this happened last time and now we're going to work on this, is a way of doing it. Shall we look at the next point? So we talked about the overall crafting a campaign. There's actually planning a mission. So after we've come up with the overarching idea and the story behind the campaign and figured out how we're going to communicate that to players, and figured out all our actual primary missions that we're going to play, like this will be a really good place where we can put in a mission. There's going to be a rescue here, there's going to be try to take over a base here, there's trying to blow up enemies here, there's trying to get through this area. We actually have to start planning the mission itself, which is the next step, isn't it? It's like the next layer down. So I think I'm going to go back to Zanstra and Vaj for this one, because you two have done a lot of planning the actual missions and taking the overarching campaign idea for the Atlantis campaign and come up with some of the plans yourself.
Yeah, that's often a challenge when you come up with a story. How do you translate that into a mission? Because the ideas that we come up with, they all sound great, but then it's sometimes hard to make that into enemy ships that fly towards you that you can shoot. If you have political intrigue or economic disaster or some kind of plague, how do you fix that using Artemis ships? It's sometimes hard to make those things work. But that's what mission planning is about.
I know often we've had things like, this station's under quarantine and lockdown because of like a plague that's going on. But we have to think of ways to complicate it. So like you'd throw in pirates, for example, who are going to come and try and take advantage of the situation. So the TSN goes to evacuate this base, and then what seems to be a straightforward mission, we always start our briefings off with, it's going to be a nice straightforward mission. This one, we just need to go in and evacuate the base. Always gets some kind of complication to add to that action. And those are always pre-planned for the game master, so we know what's coming up, but the players often have no idea, no expectation of what might happen. And I think there's plenty of devices there to be able to use in Artemis. We've got the Scarans; they have a reason to, being mercenaries, they're paid to go and attack somewhere. We've got pirates who are always looking for getting an advantage, and we've got other alien species that might be passing through the area. We don't make a lot of use of the actual space creatures, do we?
Oh, no, not very often. But kind of touching on what you've been saying, I think probably the most important thing to have in our arsenal is all of the background that we have, all of our canon. The TSN RP community has loads and loads and loads of stuff. Dozens of systems and information on a lot of the stations and such in those systems, and being able to take that information and think about, how can we manipulate this? How can we use this for making an awesome story? Gives us a lot of just a lot of flexibility in some ways, and a lot of variation too.
Yeah. It takes a lot of brainstorming and a good knowledge of the canon to be able to come up consistently with new missions every week, following the grand scheme of a campaign. And more on that, for myself, I think I keep reimagining how the actual universe is progressing and how the life in that universe is actually happening and going. What are the intentions of the key players, be it in the mission, be it in the little campaign you are having inside of the overarching campaign. All of that is really important. It helps in the brainstorming sessions as well. My colleagues here, they know me when we come into a tight spot. What do we do today? What do we do? What kind of mission do we do? I keep asking questions that leads to them revealing stuff that I possibly even didn't know from the previous missions or from the canon. And I'm still learning all of these things, not knowing about Zimnis, not knowing about the pirates. I did lead to some great discoveries and great suggestions, and we had plenty of great missions coming out of those brainstorming sessions. So I think that's really important to sit down and have time to prepare for these missions like that.
Yeah, I totally agree that like having time to sit down with other people and talk about things through and like brainstorming is a really great way to think up new ideas and new takes on different things.
Yeah. And in fact, I remember once, I've been just participating in one of the missions, and the result of that mission was something that triggered an idea in my head. And the week after that, I was GM for the duty, and I basically came up with a follow-up mission. And that follow-up mission opened, realized what the previous mission opened, and we ended up having a 7 or 8 missions streak coming out of those ideas. That ended in a completely unprepared new campaign, but it was simply logical follow-ups of the previous missions, and we just took the opportunity of what the original GM probably didn't even realize he was opening.
Mm-hmm. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about that, Raiden?
Sorry, what?
Give us a little more detail about that particular story arc.
So you mean probably the Aren campaign that I was mostly a father of in that. It turned out from one little mission when we realized in Jordan territory there was some strange Krellian incursion, and it was coming up from one of the factions we created, eventually having a vendetta against the whole TSN. And they suddenly appeared in the Jordan territory in the late last of the sectors there, in the Arin sector, which doesn't have anything else than the Jordan territory. So my reasoning was, how could they go there unnoticed and be there in such a force as it was displayed by the GM in that original mission? And after discussion, we come up, okay, we have a slingshot array. They have been setting up a new base, probably some new incursion into Jordan territory. And it led into having a great invasion into Arin sector, the faction overtaking the whole sector, and eventually TSN going in and back and slowly dismantling that opposition, having some scientific discoveries along the way. There was a black hole that was interfering with some plants. So all of that started with a simple idea, and then we get to work and used all the opportunities that that particular sector offered.
Yeah. So I've just switched on the stream to the map of the stellar cartography, and I think this really drives our campaign planning, doesn't it? I know with the Atlantis campaign, we kind of got together and I outlined the idea of, right, we're in Jordan system, there's Atlantis system there, and we want to try and push through to the Atlantis system and have a campaign built around that. How are we going to do it? And then from there, it all spiraled out of it. So Raiden's just been talking there about the action in the Arin system, which is just beyond Jordan, and having all that linked together and how all those systems link together and interactions between them is really, really important, isn't it? Really, when we're coming up with a campaign and coming up with the missions and how the mission's going to play out after it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just adding a little bit because I don't want to be hogging this section here, but it's quite important to look at the maps, and imagine the situation the factions are in at any moment and what kind of actions they might have as a follow-up. Hence, I'm pointing hint at my Waypoint 52 mission coming in the Armada Grand campaign, because that's going to be, I think, something unique for the people. Hopefully they will like it as well.
There's spoilers there.
All right, okay. So let's go back to the game broadcast. Let's get Fish back on there. Here we go. All right, okay. So shall we move on to the next segment? This might be a little bit of a bigger segment that we can talk about, the actual execution of a mission.
Yeah, and this will be a good one. We can kind of watch what Fish is doing here on the broadcast and kind of analyze that and see what he's doing to make it a good mission. Now, I don't really know the purpose of his mission. I wasn't listening to the briefing, but there's some things we can glean from just watching.
Yeah. So I think he has a TSN crew currently on there, hasn't he? Yeah. So people who have joined the TSN who are used to running these missions, so have an idea of what they can do, the extra capabilities that the sandbox adds in terms of all the communications menus and things like that. So you can see on his stream there, you should be able to see his Discord. He's currently in the comms controls and taking a look, and he's got a few different tabs up. He's got a main screen tab up, he's got comms tab up, captain's map, and master. And if you watch the first broadcast where I was game mastering a mission live, you'll have seen me using the captain's map to flick backwards and forwards. As game master, you can see everything that's going on all of the time, and you don't necessarily know what the players can and cannot see. So you use the captain's map and you flick backwards and forwards between the captain's map to be able to see what they can see. They're things like scarns, they end up cloaked and things, don't they?
Mm-hmm. Well, and sometimes it's good to get the player perspective, Oh, that's actually a lot of ships coming at him. Maybe I won't throw more at him.
Yeah, just happened to me recently, in fact, where we had some tweaked ships coming in, and I had only first wave of ships span that I planned, to flood the sector with. And I realized the crew started engaging those ships, and we had 4 ships going, and they were kind of having problems with the first 2 fleets that I've spawned. That was a big prompt to me, okay, today we're gonna be going lighter. And it just happens. You have to be prepared for these things and even test the capabilities of the current crew. That's why in TSN we actually have the simulated missions in the beginning of the sessions, so that GMs can also see, what kind of capabilities we have currently in the fleet. But overall, during the mission, one has to be prepared, for sometimes unforeseen circumstances, and also be sure not to punish people or steer them too much into a single path that was
Rating. You are far more kinder and gentler than I would be.
That's what I was
them-
thinking.
Let
Maybe.
them
Yeah.
face those fleets and see what happens.
Well, you can try that sometimes, but it's never my intention to really kill out the entire crew, entire fleet. We have certain GMs in our group that are sadly not with us, so we call it a whole effect, where sometimes we have so many ships that they are breaking down the server. That's definitely not my intention to be doing. But, good mission doesn't need a myriad of enemies. It just needs a bit of this, bit of that in mind.
So you see Fish using all the GameMaster controls there. There's quite an extensive set of GameMaster controls, and I think one of the things learning to GameMaster in the TSN RP community is getting your head round where all the controls are. I know you guys keep asking me questions, and to be honest with you, I can't always keep track of where they all are, despite being the one who put them in there.
There are, like, Xavier, you've recorded a couple of Game Master guides on your YouTube channel. I'm pulling up a link on those right now, but those really are very helpful for anyone who is interested in learning how to use the TSN sandbox.
Yeah. So you can see there's like a control panel at the bottom there. That's the AI controls. So it gives the Game Master the ability to very quickly manipulate the AI stacks that are given to the ships that are attacking. So in my opening game, I was moving an enemy force away from where the players were, so it adds that extra bit of complexity for them. Instead of just like in a normal mission where they all close on the players or they all close on the stations, or they just follow the taunts of the players and can be easily manipulated. With these Game Master controls, you're actually able to say, right, no, actually, I'm going to have those enemy forces split off, or I'm going to have them hold back. I'm going to have these ones come in on this position. I'm going to accelerate them, and it adds those extra complications. I think that you get that you don't necessarily get in a mission script unless you add lots and lots of complex coding in there for them to react.
Yeah, it's a lot of things to do. Sometimes it doesn't react as fast as we would like to, but I think exactly those little touches that we do to vary the standard behavior adds to the immersion of those missions.
It also gives us a lot more options and flexibility with what kinds of interactions with NPCs that we have.
So you could see him, Fish just there was manipulating the Grant using the AI controls. It's got the target set to Game Master. It says target GM switch. I think I can just show my mouse actually on this. So yeah, it says target GM switch, and that says what he's going to be controlling. And then he can click on the Grant and he can assign particular AI stacks to it that are pre-programmed into the sandbox. That scan location there as well is something that we added. You can see there was information that kind of give a little bit of extra context. We use things like that to guide the player to where we want them, don't we, really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just last week we had a mission where we went to go take out a slingshot array, and we used scan points to show, kind of what direction those energy readings were coming from.
Yeah, so they are the scan points are just like a generic mesh actually with text set over the top of them. So I give them. You can set the text properties of a generic mesh, so it gives you scan text, and that's how they're created. Somebody just asking in the chat, one person worried that if they get an alert, their head's going to be blown off by Discord because of the sound levels. I do apologise for that, Troy. He was asking, is the TSN sandbox for vanilla Artemis? Do all players need a copy or just a server and the GM? The sandbox is it's just a mission script. It's a mission script, so all mission scripts have to be server side. So you have to have it installed on the server machine to be able to run it. But the sandbox itself, it isn't that everybody needs the sandbox. There's no extra audio files in there. I've currently got 2 versions of it. One version is the one that Fish is running at the minute. This is for the stock Artemis game. I don't really code for the stock Artemis game because I code for the TSN RP community with this sandbox. But for this weekend, I went through and I changed all the sandbox so that it could run with the base Artemis game. The actual full TSN sandbox, which I work on regularly, you need the TSN mod for it, and the TSN mod adds new ships, new textures. It changes some of the energy settings as well for players and things, so that the ships have got a little bit more endurance when they're in a mission. So the full TSN sandbox that's maintained and kept up to date requires a TSN mod, and that is something that every single person playing it would have to install. Whereas the I've called it the Armada sandbox, I think I've called it.
Yes.
And I've got a link to that which I can post up. I'll post it in the Discord. The Armada sandbox will run with the standard Artemis game with all these controls that you can see at the minute. So, because I think a couple of people watching these have gone, I want to get my hands on this mission script. Yeah. I'm also aware of some people grabbing it and having a look at the code in the background, and I think one of the mission scripts that we had submitted borrowed a little bit of code from the sandbox.
Can't blame them.
Yeah, so if I put something out there in the forums in the public domain, I don't mind people having a look and taking bits. Obviously, if bits are taken, it's always nice to reference. For example, in the sandbox, we've got the fuel collection system. That idea comes from years ago. It actually comes from the mission script Havoc in their Hammock sector, and that was created by Mike Subselny, and I took that and I used it to come up with the idea of the fuel collection system and tweak it. Anyway, we've gone a little bit off game mastering now. We're talking a bit about sandbox. We'll go into that in another broadcast. So having a think then about executing a mission, how do you help players out, particularly if they're getting into a tricky situation, perhaps with too many enemies? What kind of tips do you guys have?
Well, one of the things that we do is we use Teamspeak, and since we're doing role playing, we have obviously various roles. You have your captain of each ship, you have the fleet captain, and you have the command and control officer. The command and control is essentially the game master, but he's playing the role of like a command headquarters far away from the mission and monitoring what everyone's doing. He provides overall direction. The fleet commander is one in charge of the fleet and essentially gives the orders to the fleet and interprets what the command and control wants for the mission to go forward. So a lot of times, whenever we get to a point where we're trying to communicate a story point or advance the story, we will broadcast to the fleet or broadcast to the fleet captain that a particular situation has arisen, and essentially through role playing, give some direction on where the story needs to go next. So we could say this base over here contains some critical personnel or information. You need to go capture this base because our intelligence says that that's where our next goal is. And then the fleet captain can then say, all right, you two ships, you go over there and capture that base. And this other ship, you go distract the enemies, keep them away from there. So that's one way to advance the story and to keep everyone interested in not just what's going on in the current mission, but how it relates to the broader story. So we do make extensive use of Teamspeak to communicate that information.
There is also tactical approach to that, I think, where, in the mission, if you see, if you have a plan, if the campaign has a plan and the players are struggling to achieve the goals, it's the GM's choice, to be this flexible and allow the players to actually complete the goal by additional means or giving them more support, weakening the enemy. All these things can happen. And I think it's important to be really flexible in imagining other ways how we can help the players, be it spawning friendly ships, giving a simple CIC broadcast, that something else happens somewhere that gives us the information needed. All these hints can push the players into right direction and not seem like to be too pushy and being too linear in terms of the gameplay.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to try and balance as well, isn't it? Because you want you want them to. You've got certain objectives and goals in mind as a game master of what you want them to achieve, but you want the players to feel like they are able to achieve them and not get frustrated. I know there's been a couple of times when I've been running as commanding the fleet, and you know what the objective is, and you're trying to get there, and you get overwhelmed by enemies, and when you start losing ships, you end up with crews sitting out, and it can get really frustrating. So, really good game masters take that into account, and they don't make it easy. They make it challenging, but at the same time, if it's too challenging, you get your crews getting frustrated, you get your crews missing out, and maybe even sitting out when we're role playing a mission, and it's hard to say, oh well, that crew's just going to spawn back in with a ship. You've got to really think about that as a game master. I mean, I know sometimes we've lost ships unintentionally in a mission, and we've had to think on our feet as game masters of how you get around that. So right, okay, you can respawn your ship, but in the GameMaster Controls, we can damage every single system across your ship. So you're going to have to fix them first before you're ready for action again. Or you're going to have to wait till you respawn the ship until the area is safe, and then you can get back in. So you've got to build those into your story as you're going along into your mission. So go on, Faj.
Sometimes we have the shuttle operations in the sandbox, and we can use that as like a tool. Go send some engineering teams over to this ship that went down so that we can get it repaired and the crews can get back on their feet again.
One of the questions in the chat that has come up from Troy is, in general, when GMing for less experienced players, do you find it better to run at lower difficulty with many fleets, or higher difficulty with fewer enemies? Any thoughts on scaling the difficulty?
Well, I would say the sandbox, as you well know, Xavier, since you wrote it, always runs at difficulty 10. So to eliminate some of the difficulties associated with inexperienced crews, you have to cut back on the number of enemies. Alternatively, you can come up with goals that are in the storyline, but not perhaps quite as arduous as you had originally intended, like Radiant said earlier.
Yeah, and I think because there's so much that you can spawn. I mean, if you have the difficulty level 10 is always set, and you can manipulate the AI to be able to give players a bit of breathing room. But at the same time, you can look at what you're spawning. So I know I've game mastered for some less experienced crews in the TSN, then I've game mastered for 3 or 4 really experienced hardcore kind of crews in the TSN, and you've got to look at how you balance it. We don't change the difficulty level, we change what we're spawning, don't we? So for example, we know that we've got you can spawn a fleet of Scaran vessels, so 3 Scaran vessels at the same time. 1 Scaran vessel is tricky for an inexperienced crew. 3 Scaran vessels can take on experienced crews, and it will be evenly matched because they will pin you in place and blow up your ordnance before it can reach them and just take you out. And we've lost quite a few experienced crews to Scarans, haven't we?
I have been a victim of that.
Yeah,
I remember that.
So
but sorry to interrupt. I think these are the moments which makes the missions memorable and makes people coming back and back again, because every mission can be balanced one way or another. You can have missions where you fight myriads of light Corellian cruisers, which is a challenge on its own, because having to blow up too many ships at one place, it's a challenge. Or the other missions where you have one dog of command, which is giving us a pain. Or you have a mission where you have well-balanced 7-8 Togot fleets, going at it. But if a GM controls that mission correctly, you will have just in the nick of time ability to turn it around, and save the base that you wanted to save. And that's what makes those missions memorable.
And I think as well, the GMs have really got to know what the capabilities of the enemy ships are. So, for example, if you spawn a Scaran fleet, that's going to be a very heavy fleet, and you're going to have to watch very carefully that combat. If you spawn a light Corellian fleet, kind of the composition of it and who's going to be able to take it on. So the more you GM and the more you get to know the capabilities of the enemy fleets, the more you can start to match it to how the crew's performing. You got to really watch how the crew performs carefully, haven't you?
Moving on to discussion point 4, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, I think that's I think that's. I hope that's answered Troy's question there. So we don't scale the difficulty. We don't go from difficulty 10 to difficulty 3 for easier ships. And I suppose another thing to consider just before we move on is we can have one ship that's got a really experienced crew on, and then another ship that doesn't have an experienced crew on. We can have a ship that's short-handed, and they'll all be in the same game. So we have to look at. I know when I'm commanding a fleet, I have to look at what experience I've got across ships. So that's a little bit of player onus on it. Of are you going to send your most inexperienced crew against us 3 Scarans? Are you going to send your most experienced crew? But as a GM, you can't just go, oh yeah, we'll lower the level because we've got an inexperienced crew, because you might not always have just an inexperienced crew. So we very much do it through the enemies that we deploy, and the number of enemies that we deploy and the type of enemies that we deploy. So,
and also, wow, I just completely lost my train of thought there.
That's all right. Well, it is 1946 according to my time, which gives us about 14 minutes left as a stream. Should we go on to the fourth point that we've got to talk about? We're going to talk about our personal thoughts and ideas. The things that we kind of consider when GMing a mission. So, Vaj, what kind of things do you have in consideration when you're GMing a mission? What kind of quirks do you put in? What kind of little signature GM things do you have that you use?
Signature GM things.
Technical term.
So something I'll do if there's if there's a ship that is kind of off on its own a little bit, and maybe it's like just wrapping up like a fleet of Corellians, let's say. Sometimes I'll drop a Scaran pretty much right on top of them.
Vaj's trademark move.
nasty.
Yeah, Vaj's trademark move, ambush them.
Yeah.
Yep. And I try not to, like, I try to keep an eye on like how they're doing, like make sure they're not like out of energy. But you know, stuff like that keeps the crew on their toes.
So you like seeing almost like as they are kind of settling back and going, yeah, we got this, we're sorted. Suddenly you throw something in there to mix it up and get the action going again.
Yep.
Yeah. Zanston, what about you? What kind of trademark moves have you got in the GMing world?
I struggle sometimes not to put too much in there, so I have to tell myself to rein it in. But one of the things that I like to be sure that happens is somehow get storyline fits, and I'm fond of putting things in communications that the communication officers will get that they need to tell the rest of the ship. Sometimes what happens is the communication officers feel neglected. So I try and put things in there that are critical to the mission or critical to the story that they can read and that they can then provide to their ships and then to the fleet overall as to how the story is progressing. That's one of the things I like to try and put in.
So your big thing is very much getting the story across to the players as they're going through, making sure that you've got your comms officer engaged and they are that to and fro between the comms officer and the rest of the bridge or the game master themselves.
Yeah, the communication, the messages back and forth is one of the better ways to essentially do exposition for your story.
And for sure.
Putting that in is sometimes a challenge between throwing all the ships at everybody and making sure that they don't die versus getting some information about the story get across.
Yeah. So what about you, Raiden? What kind of things do you consider while you're going through Game Mastering a mission?
So I've hinted already about that. It's surprises, making each mission unique in a certain way, trying to reimagine the world and make the sectors a living thing. I think that's my trademark. So coming up with some neat new additions to what's happening. So even if it's a bash and slash kind of mission, still adding a little bit comms messages, into that mission. I often get comments back after those missions that they like those chatters. Be it like the angry talk of commander that bashes Krallians for not respecting the orders, so the Krallians went in, and they got totally obliterated. These kind of things I really like to add to those things. Although sometimes it's hard to master that and still be focusing on the mission and not start playing out. Yeah. Although I have to confess, sometimes GM can get bored as well. You spend all the fleet you wanted to have there, and what does a poor GM do? Just watching for 15 minutes the story to unfold if it's needed to have it in the story. That's when I came, with some creative ideas. Spawning luxury rhinos that are running for their lives, shuttles that need rescuing, all kinds of things coming out of trying to spice up the mission.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, something that I don't remember if we mentioned it already, but there's an external tool that's been written that lets us have a second support GM handle communications, which is great if the primary GM is worried about keeping the ships alive or keeping fleets deployed or directing them. That another GM can then inject messages from various sources to keep the storyline going.
I mean, we've had some really great missions there, actually, haven't we? Where we've had 2 game masters or even 3 game masters and 2 separate missions going on. Those have always been interesting.
Yeah.
So what is it? So I'm guessing from that it's going to link into the next point of what do we think makes the most enjoyable mission. Raiden, for you, it sounds like adding those extra little bits of
flavor.
Yeah, those extra bits of flavor and backgrounds. Answer, it's you getting the story going, and Vaj, it's you scaring the living daylights out your players by the sounds of it.
That's part of it. It's more like, for me, I think this is kind of a slightly tangent, but I know like Raiden in particular really likes to plan out his missions, which is awesome. Like I fully support that, and Xansa to an extent too. I tend to be a lot more general with my outlines. Sometimes I'll just have like a couple sentences, and all the rest of it just kind of comes out as I go through the mission. And that I think allows a lot of flexibility for me to be creative throughout, and that's what I prefer really, is the story building as I go along.
And I think it makes sense, Vash, because compared to me, you are vastly more experienced than I am.
That's fair.
I'm still learning some of the aspects of the canon, but it's still that's how you progress through the things. You experience it the first time. I have to confess, the first time I started spawning Zimni ships on the players, it was a big wake-up call for me because I didn't study the ships, didn't study the canon on that one, and I was like, "Oops, that's probably too much." And had to rein in, yeah. So, but you remember for the next time. That's how you learn.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah. So, go on, Sansa.
There's 2 big things that require balancing in my opinion. There's the getting the ships out there and having your bridge crew coordinate and be able to solve the problems of whatever combat's going to be in front of them. Then the other part of that is getting the story out, and so you have to balance those things, because there's some people who are more into just the combat operations and tweaking your energy so it's still there, shooting things down, driving your ship, those kinds of things which are integral to Artemis. And then there's the role-playing aspect where you are the officer as part of the Stellar Navy, and you have a particular rank and a particular leadership position, and you also are responding to whatever the story is. You've got to try and get both of those aspects in equal measure out for your participants to be able to do both of those things. There are some people who just want to do the Artemis bits, and then there are some people who really, they just care about the role-playing bits. As a game master, you need to be able to do both of those things to provide an enjoyable experience for participants that have both of those varying degrees of those expectations for what they're going to get out of this.
So, Let's have a look. We've got a couple more points to go. Let's. What time are we on? We've got about 5 minutes or less.
5 minutes.
The stream. So, quick comment from all three of you. Challenges that you've come across as being a GM. What's the most challenging thing you've done? And what's one of the most memorable moments? Do you have any memorable moments from GMing?
Bad internet connection.
Biggest challenge, bad internet connection. Experienced earlier, I believe.
Yes, it happened today.
Yeah.
So, Vaj, what about you? Challenges or memorable moments?
I think my biggest challenge, and something that I really have to keep at the forefront of my mind, is making sure that the crews aren't just sitting there twiddling their thumbs. Generally, I'm pretty happy to watch them fly across the sector, but often, crews don't want to do that. Maybe the helmsman, but that gets boring. So I really have to keep that in mind and make sure that when we're starting a mission, we're starting relatively close to where there's going to be something for people to do. As for memorable moments, well, I always did enjoy Caltrans.
Everybody loves the Caltrans. For those of you watching yet who haven't had a chance to play with the TSN RP community, the Caltrans are a purely mechanical race, aren't they? That are kind of like mindless automatons, and have been the demise of several TSN ships. You get those moments, don't you, in missions where you see radiation source detected, black hole appears, Caltrans pour out. Not Caltrans.
Although usually people, once they see the radiation point, they're like, "Oh crap!"
Let's run quickly, opposite direction. Raiden, any memorable moments, any challenges that you've had to overcome?
Yeah, I think the biggest one was when I carefully prepared a mission, and once I launched the server, I figured out that the sector that I planned to be in actually didn't exist in the sandbox. There was a mix-up, and I had a completely different sandbox than my mission, expected to have a certain environmental features in it, and there were none. So that was a challenging mission. I think we still turned it around.
So and having to tweak on the fly.
Oh yes, yes. I mean, the whole mission was gone, and I had to come up with something else, and it still worked. So that was a happy moment for me. And memorable moment, I think every single time when I drop a little, bits and pieces of the, the flavors, as you call it, and I get, some comments after the missions. Hey, I noticed, that thing. So I like to spice these things up. So people are, really on their toes, watching for unexpected.
Cool. So yeah, I know one of my most memorable moments is I say it's a memorable moment. It's quite a recent one. GameMastering 2 games at the same time. That was an interesting one.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
I think we had 2 ships on one game, didn't we? And
3 on the other, wasn't it?
3 on the other, yeah. So I had to do 2 missions at the same time. So luckily I've got 2 monitors, so I could switch between the 2. And I think for me there's been a lot of memorable moments with the stories that have come up and the little bits of canon that we've ended up adding. So like the what's the drink that we have, the Hyodin drink? Hyoko that's been made, and the coffee pot, I remember that, and TSN Hunter's disco ball that we've had to retrieve and stuff.
Right.
Yeah, the psychic coffee pot.
Coffee pot.
Yeah, that takes us into different dimensions, and I think those kind of stories are really memorable moments. Most challenging thing as a game master. That's a tricky one. That actually. I think.
Yeah, right.
Like you say, you've got to make sure that. I think the most challenging ones is when you see the players getting into a sticky situation and you're like, how am I going to get them out of that without breaking the immersion for them? So
yeah,
there's a ship being completely swamped by Arvonian fighters and Torgoth command ships and all sorts of stuff, and you're a bit like, how am I going to get them out of that without ruining the experience for them? So I think that throws some challenges my way sometimes, especially when I'm expecting more experienced crews not to get into those situations than they do. So you're like, yeah, they'll be able to handle that, and suddenly you see, nope, they are swamped and they've got no engines again because they've just backed over their own mine. Excellent.
To that, I would say it's a tough luck. It's just one of those surprises, where there is no miracle saving you. And as long as you can have a next mission, Konkonokta mission, where we save the crews, save the ship, even ground the ship for a couple of weeks, being in the dry docks, it just adds to that flavor. Sometimes you have a better day, sometimes you didn't. In fact, what we mentioned before, the Aren mission that came up, out of the one of the missions we had, actually was an unsuccessful mission where the GM spawned too many ships. We had to retreat, and it led to, oh look, how many ships must be there? This is something big, and creates new things. That's why I think people keep coming back to the games, because we have it so complex, and none of the missions is looking alike.
Yeah, and in terms of ships blowing up, I know there's been oh, your ship blew up last week. For the next 2 weeks, you're flying a scout.
Yeah,
which is always met with moans and groans, where it's like, maybe you'll take more care next time. All right.
And the offline chatter about those is also awesome.
Yeah. Right, okay, I think we are going to end it there because we've come to the end of our time for this live broadcast. We want to move on to the next thing. If you've been listening in, thank you very much for joining us. We hope it was informative and interesting to listen to. We hope it's inspired you to try your hand at some GMing yourself. Our GMs are about, so if you want to chat to them a little bit more about what they do and how they're doing it, if you want to watch some of the live streams in the background when I'm GMing a mission, I'll try and put that up there. Then you're more than welcome to. If you're interested in taking a look at the TSN sandbox, we're going to add a link to the description once this has finished.
It's also in the chat.
Yep. Oh, cool. Vaj already got it up in the chat for us. And what we'll do is we'll get the version posted that will work with this stock Artemis game. If you want to know about the TSN mod and the actual full TSN sandbox, which is constantly being worked on, then we can post you up the links there and direct you in the right direction. If you are listening live right now, our next broadcast is going to be starting in just over an hour from now. We've got a special guest joining us for that one, Mike Substalny. He's responsible for the Artemis cannon, and I was talking to him last night actually, and he said basically what it comes down to is Tom decides what he wants to add that's cool to the game, and then Mike has to try and explain it in canon. That's it. That's the process that he said he goes through. So he's going to be talking us through that process about a little bit about the Artemis cannon, about some of the things that he's invented, some of the stories, some of the screenplays that he's been talking about and writing as well. Donovan is going to be running our next Atlantis campaign mission. I think it's going to be starting about now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yep. So if you want to join in the Atlantis campaign, it doesn't matter if you've joined previously or you're not going to be able to join the rest. You can just jump in for that one mission. You'll get to have an experience of what we've been talking about here, basically a proper game mastered mission that you can have a go at. So head on to Teamspeak if you want to join in that mission, and we'll talk to you again in an hour. Thanks very much for watching.
Thank you.